Welcome back everybody, I am Follygon, and we are on day 3 of Sculptober, and our prompt for the day is poison. And with that, I decided to do Snow White. So for this one, we're actually going to jump around quite a bit, but at least for the initial stages, I wanted to make sure that I showed you the full process for my block out, and a little bit of the creepy face that I'm sculpting right now that was feeling a bit Voldemort-like. That's all just part of the early stages though. If you are new around here, click that subscribe button. And if you'd like to learn more about digital sculpting, you can always check out my courses, brushes, and materials at the link in the description at gumroad.com/Follygon. So like I was saying, I wanted to keep the initial stage here, showing off the face, that early block out stage. Pretty raw, pretty uncut, so I don't really skip around here in the beginning stages. But here soon, we'll jump around a little bit, and I'll explain why once we get there. So for the early stages of this, for just blocking out a human head, I don't want to say I pretty much do the same thing every single time, because I always like to experiment and try to figure out new ways to improve my workflow, or just try out new techniques. A lot of the time, I think formula kind of stagnates what you're trying to accomplish, in a way that kind of makes it feel automatic, to where you're no longer growing, you're no longer learning new things, and that is why I try to always try new workflows, or always try kind of new, like essentially the A to C or whatever is always the same, but the B, the middle portion, I try to switch it up as often as I can. And I always try to sculpt as much as I can from scratch. I think in terms of just doing stuff for yourself, kind of like what we're doing here for Sculptober, I think it's a great way to practice that and really just kind of create everything. If you're doing client work, it's a little bit different though, right? You're kind of in a hurry, and it doesn't really matter how you get to that end goal, as long as you can get there as quick as possible. And you can probably save yourself some time and probably save your client some money as well. But when you're just doing personal stuff like I am here, or you are doing for Sculptober, Inktober, or whatever maybe art challenge you're trying to do, I say try to take the hard road and get as much practice as you can. So our face is no longer looking quite as Voldemort-like, right? I have an actual nose on there now, as well as a couple other facial features, but things are still very generic. And that is what I was feeling later in this sculpt as well. It just felt too generic. I wanted to sculpt Snow White for this theme of poison. Obviously, you know, the poison apple. I believe it's in Wreck-It Ralph 2 where she even has the poison apple on her shirt, which is a nice little touch. So I wanted to bring some of that into this character, into this daily sculpt for Sculptober, but I wasn't really sure how I was going to do that in these beginning stages. So I just started off with something that I'm used to doing, sculpting a face, playing around with some different ideas, some different proportions, trying to figure out what worked. I was also trying to play around with how sharp and soft I wanted to make some of the transitions in the face. A lot of those sharper edges and angles can make things feel a bit more evil or malevolent sometimes. But moving on here, we go to our first skip, where I have already created the collar and the cape for the character, as well as started to add in some poly paint or color to the face. For this, I keep it pretty standard, pretty neutral. Just basic skin tone with a little bit of some warmth around areas where they're a bit more fleshy, like kind of like the cheeks and ears, and maybe some thin areas as well. Then on to extracting some geometry for the hair, a very simple process that I've shown off many times on my channel. I don't really like the standard extraction tools that come with ZBrush, so typically I do what I did right here in this video, which is just duplicating my geometry, cutting it off, and then manually giving that some thickness or inflating it or what have you. Here what I did was I actually kept it one-sided and just took my clay brush and started scratching some form on the surface using a move brush to kind of shape it up, and then add in some other pieces of geometry, Dynamesh that all together, and kind of go from there. Very simple, very quick, very dirty, but it gets the job done. Now we're going to skip ahead quite a bit to where I have added a lot of additional facial features. Namely, you'll notice that the character has eyes now, as well as a little bit better defined lips and nose, and I've changed some of the shapes in the face as well. Made things quite a bit softer, maybe feel a bit more feminine, maybe feel a bit more on character for Snow White. And that is when I said, you know what, screw all this, let's go ahead and just destroy it all. So as you can see, I kind of filled in the eyes there very quickly. I am taking the lips and piercing them back together so that I can dynamesh and merge the lips, and I begin kind of erasing and removing a lot of what I had sculpted. And it's honestly for the better, in my opinion. A lot of the time, it's hard to not be attached to what you're creating. Sometimes though, you just need to kind of go a completely different direction, and that's what I decided to do here. So I filled in the eyes, I sculpted a little bit of form right on top of there to inflate them, make them feel like they're closed, and then I carved in along the bottom edge and sharpened it up to make it feel like it might be an eyelid. Now at this time, I was thinking that I would probably take this in the direction of making it feel a bit more creepy. I had a couple ideas for that, for maybe like stitching up the lips or something like that. That seemed a little, maybe a little bit too much. So I decided to fill in her eyes and nose to make it feel a bit more skeletal. And then I actually started adding in some red paint all around the face to create essentially the apple that I mentioned earlier, the poison apple, right? That kind of has this like green slime or poison dripping down it, which you've probably seen before. So I started heading in that direction first, but that felt really awkward to me. The red of that wasn't really reading super well. Maybe if I would have put like the green dripping poison over top of the face, that would have made a bit more sense. I don't know. That's something maybe I could try some other time. But I didn't like the red here, so I decided to swap that over to white, make it feel a bit more skeletal. I did keep the lips painted red for now, but I actually swapped that back to black later. And yeah, so we're already heading in a very, very different direction from where I was just a moment ago. And a decision like this is not something that's easy to make. I mean, it took me a while playing around with the face before I really decided to just say, screw it, let's try something completely different from where we're headed. Sometimes that's a hard decision to make, but maybe taking like 30 minutes and just trying something completely new, you know, save one version of your sculpt or your artwork or whatever you're working on, if you're working digitally, of course, and then kind of swap gears, try something new. If it's not working out, maybe it'll inspire you to try something else. You know, experiment. It's a good way to kind of get the creative juices flowing, even if you kind of maybe essentially waste that 30 minutes there of trying something new, you might find a completely other direction that ends up being way better. Here I started painting the face like a Day of the Dead mask kind of thing, or Day of the Dead face paint. And that is when I thought, you know what, let's just kind of go, you know, the whole 9 yards here and actually start kind of turning this a bit more skeletal. So I ended up removing a lot of the form around the masseter muscles around the jaw, right? So kind of pinching that in, making it feel really skinny. And then I removed a lot of the form for the nose, and by a lot of the form, I guess I mean all of the form. Then from here, I was having a lot more fun working on this sculpt. It was so much different than kind of what I imagined initially for what I was going to do for this character. I was just going to do another run-of-the-mill Snow White, right? But this really started to feel pretty cool. I was having fun playing around with the shapes in the face for the kind of cartoon stylized skull that was also a blend between something feeling bony but also fleshy. As you can see, I still have eyes and lips on there, so it was a lot of fun to kind of play with the different volumes there for trying to figure out how skinny and thin I wanted to make the area around the mouth, and then how sharp I wanted to play with some of those forms. If I wanted to make them feel really sharp and bony, or if I wanted to start kind of making them feel a bit more soft and rounded and fleshy. So that was a lot of fun, a lot of cool stuff to play around with there, and all of that is because I took a quick, 30 minutes to play around with something new. Jumping ahead to a little bit of the extra form for the hair, you guys have seen very similar processes of what I'm doing here if you've ever seen any of my sculpting videos before where I work on hair. For this one, it's pretty simple, just taking a clay brush to kind of rough up the surface, get some directionality there, and then using my personal Sharpsoft brush to kind of carve in and create a little bit more volume. Kind of like a Dam Standard brush and a Standard brush kind of combined. So it's like a Damien Standard, but maybe a little bit softer. So get the directionality down for the hair, keep it nice and rough, nice and simple, and then working on the bow up top as well. Getting that kind of in place, playing around with some different shapes up there, using some pinch, some move, and overall just keeping it pretty simple for the most part. I break symmetry on that later on, including the hair, to make that feel a bit more natural. Anytime you have anything that's very close to the symmetrical axis, that midline, anything that's symmetrical there is going to be even more apparent. So if you have something like a bow or maybe like a mouth or a nose, you might want to add a little bit of asymmetry around that midline. I find that even the slightest tweak can make things feel a lot more natural. Then a few more accessories for the poofy shoulders, as well as a little bit more of the body. I was realizing that the termination point for this bust was feeling really awkward, but I'm glad that I took some time to work on the face more and kind of figure out the direction there. So, you can only work on one thing at a time. It's okay to kind of let some other stuff fall behind. You'll get to it later, right? So I begin working on a little bit more of the body. I mainly wanted to create a little bit more of the torso so that I could figure out how I wanted to kind of chop that off later. I was thinking about just using a gradient to kind of blend it. That's always a nice little way. But if you crop your image in such a way, you can also make it look like it is a full character and you just kind of zoomed in on the face. So that's a nice little trick for you if you're creating a bust and you're just going to be showing off a render of your work. The body I keep super simple. I just duplicate my geometry that I already had there for what was left of the chest, and then just kind of pull that down, yank it down with my move brush. Use the pinch brush to block out the line of the rib cage, which is very important. Any bony landmarks are super important. Throw on a couple volumes for her breast, which I end up just kind of sculpting and blending together either way, just to kind of keep that simplified, as well as, there's cloth and fabric over top of the form there, so you're not going to get, a ton of cleavage or anything like that. And then finishing up with some cleanup for the face, and then adding in some of that asymmetry and cleanup that I was mentioning earlier. For the most part, I keep it pretty simple, as you guys have seen for my couple other Sculptober videos. I have to do these all in one day, and that is a lot of work, especially when I have other stuff that I need to do. So the smallest amount of asymmetry here, just to make it a bit more visually interesting. In particular, those things like the ribbon that I mentioned, or bow on the top of her head that are very close to the symmetrical axis, as well as adding in a little bit more texture, a little bit more form, and a little bit more asymmetry to her hair. Oh, and one final little detail, adding some extra color to her poofy little shoulder pads. So adding in the kind of black outlined red shape there, which kind of feels like, looking at it, they almost feel like apple seeds or seed shape with that red color as well, kind of alluding to an apple. I'm not sure if that is the intention, but that's kind of the read I got there as I started to paint those on. And that is pretty much it for day 3 of Sculptober. So if you are new around here, definitely click that subscribe button. And if you'd like to learn more about digital sculpting, check out gumroad.com/Follygon for all of my brushes, courses, materials, as well as the Appeal Academy, my main course and mentorship program. If you're interested in participating in Sculptober, sculptober.com, link down below, of course. And with that, I will see you all tomorrow for day 4 with the prompt prehistoric. Until then, you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.